We now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W. Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Never good night and never goodbye. We're always on 24/7 somewhere around the dial. The name of this program is It's Time, and it gets its title from the fact of the truth that it's time that we started speaking up and speaking out and acting up and acting out against the injustices and the inequalities in the economic system of this world, especially here in the United States. Our marching orders. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Rev Nathaniel Martin, pastor of the New Life Institutional Baptist Church here in Los Angeles, California. Our marching orders come from James chapter 5 and verse 4, which says, "Behold the hire of the laborers, who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." Our follow-up scripture is taken from the old Tanakh scripture in the book of Deuteronomy, which says, beginning chapter 24, verse 14, "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren," that means whether you know him or whether he's of your race, "or of thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee." I want you to note, "For he setteth his heart upon it." You get your salary, your pay, you pay your bill. You buy the things that you have the need of. You may be about to get your water cut off if you don't get your money on that day, and they're going to hold you up, make you wait from 12 noon until 4:30, and know the bank's closed at 6. You're not supposed to hold your money. You're not supposed to do you like that. And many other indignities, among which those are really the least, that are perpetrated against the working people of this country and have been perpetrated and continue. Which of us is unaware that surreptitiously and stealthily they are developing robots to take the place of our jobs? Many of our jobs are now being, become obsolete. We're being automated out of a job. They call that progress. How's that progress when I can't feed my family? But these are the issues that we as a nation, as a society, and as a people must confront. How is it, my brothers and sisters, that as long as the stock market is going up and they're making trillions of dollars, way above their profit margin, way above their needs, way above what you and I would consider rich, they're in hyper rich, uber rich, if you want to coin that phrase. And yet when the stock market falls a few points because of the fact of how they feel that the economy is being overheated because people like you and me are getting hold to a little extra money, why is that fear among the traders on Wall Street that if the poor get some money, that they may be able to pull up out of their condition and improve themselves? Why is it that your government would not want you to improve? Why is it that the major corporations that trade in us, in goods and services, it's the same thing, are complaining when we began to do just a little bit better, with a little bit more money in the ticket, a little bit more money in the paycheck? Now, they make bonuses way up here. You get a little increase of a salary way down here, and they complain. What's up with that? My brothers and sisters, it's time for us to wake up and face up to the fact of the inherent inequities in the economic system are not there by accident. They're there by purpose and direct intent of those who have put the system into operation. Happy Black History Month to everybody. And we are on the way in celebrating Black History Month at our church. And Black History Month was started by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. And he wrote a book entitled The Miseducation of the Negroes, and which he asked that we would start such a day, and he and along with some others, not he exclusively by himself, but he along with others began to celebrate the Negro history, Black history, which is really world history. I noticed that one of the actors says that Black history is ridiculous. Well, when you reach that high level of economic success that he has reached, I imagine, you can turn your back on your people. But we cannot turn our back on our people. We got to teach our history because our history is important. Why is Black history ridiculous, but Jewish history is not ridiculous? Irish history is not ridiculous. German history is not ridiculous. It's only Black history that is termed unnecessary. How are you going to tell world history or United States history or American history without inclusion of Black history? Its time is long since out for this sole canard that the Black people have made no contribution upon the face of this good earth. How long will that old myth and legend keep being regurgitated? Now even science is beginning to vindicate the accomplishments and the civilization that was started by Black people thousands of years before the Caucasian came out of the caves of Europe. We don't want to get off into that today. We want to call your attention in brief to one of our heroes of Black history. His name was Heman Sweat. And Mr. Sweat, back in the 40s, wanted to be a lawyer, wanted to attend law school. Only problem is that in Houston, Texas, as a matter of fact, in the state of Texas, not just Houston, Texas, but in the entire state of Texas, there was not one law school for Negroes or colored, as we were known at that time. And so he applied to the University of Texas in Austin to go to school there. And Mr. Painter very courteously wrote him a letter and let him know that they did not accept Negroes in the University of Texas Law School. Well, Mr. Sweat sued University of Texas, and the case began to work its way into the system. And one of the stopgap measures, based upon the passage of Plessy v. Ferguson, which set up the separate but equal doctrine. So even though there was no established law school for colored people in Houston, the legislators in the state of Texas got together with the officials in Houston, and they hastily assembled a law school in Jack Yates at that time, as it was known, and attempted to use that to assuage the glaring inconsistency. Now, the problem with the law school, or where you go to law school, is so vitally important because it's always in your resume, it's always in your transcript. There are certain things that are just intangible. It's like saying you went to Harvard. All right, if you went to Harvard and I only went to Jack Yates Law School, then you more or less going to get the person who went to Harvard Law School as opposed to the person who went to Jack Yates High School Law School, which you know nothing about because Harvard has that prestige. You follow me? And so the lawyers for the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall and Attorney Carter, appealed the case all the way to the Supreme Court. As a matter of fact, they won the case. And Mr. Herman Sweat had to be admitted to the University of Texas Law School. But out of that came what was known as TSU, which eventually became known as Texas Southern University. But many of the Negroes called it at that time the Sweat University and refused to go there because they knew it was simply a Jim Crow school, hastily assembled in order to assuage or to try to prevent the intervention of the federal government in the affairs of the state of Texas as they dealt with what they were known as the Negro problem. And that's a little bit. So Texas Southern University came into existence around 1947. It had another name, but then in 1947 they petitioned, or 1951 they petitioned to make it Texas Southern University, which it remains today. Very thriving, very successful, very proud university there in the city of Houston, my hometown. And so those type of obstacles, stumbling blocks, mountains, if you will, oceans we have had to contend with. And surely had it not been for the Lord who was on our side, we would have perished when men rose up against us. And if it was anybody who had to fight to get rid of the obstacles and to move the mountain and to cross the ocean, it has been the American black man trying to negotiate the rigors of the economic system and the legislative stumbling blocks that have been put in his way historically here in America. Some people say I don't get excited when I talk. I try not to, not because I'm not feeling it, but because if I get too excited, hey, wrong person to come out. We got to talk about these great issues and confront them and strategize how to overcome them now going forward, just as much as our earlier ancestors and our more recent contemporaneous ancestors who have gone on before us worked so hard to overcome the obstacle. I can remember right there in our little community of Central Garden, we didn't have a school bus. White folks had a school bus, plus the school was much closer. We had to walk to school, but the neighborhood people, led by Miss Alberta Cheeks and others, they went down and argued with the school board and argued with the city council of the state of Houston. They finally got us a school bus to carry us over to Harper Elementary School. Houston was segregated at that time. Something they don't like to mention now. Very shameful period, but it must be told. And that type of proactive state of mind is what we must continue to always manifest. We must become proactive and not reactive. Another thing I want to mention is that on Black History, during Black History Month, at Greater Allen Temple, there in Jamaica, Queens, New York, there was a police chief there who, following the death of Eric Garner and Michael Brown. Eric Garner was killed in 2014. I think Michael Brown was the next year. But the point that I want to make is that a police chief, who was this time police commissioner, was the guest speaker that day on the Black History program. White fella by the name of Police Chief William Bratton. This is what William Bratton said. William Bratton acknowledged, let me quote what he said, that many of the worst parts of Black history were made possible by the police. Now, he went on to say, many of the best parts of American history were made possible by the police. But it's a very telling point that many of the worst parts of black history were made possible by the police. And he didn't stop there. He went on to state that in the city of New York, where he was now the police chief or police commissioner, whatever the title is again, that Peter Stuyvesant was a slaveholder and supported the slave system. And he developed the police department there in the city of New York to what? To police the slaves, to keep up with the slaves. And let me read another statement right here. Slavery, our country's original sin, sat on a foundation codified by law, enforced by the police and slave catchers. And Peter Stuyvesant was one of the major architects of the police system and used slaves. Mind you, he was a slaveholder. People talk about New York. New York ain't nothing to talk about. And that's way up north as you can get. Peter Stuyvesant was a slaveholder, and he used slaves to build the colony. That was the first iteration of the state of New York. Think about that. But the point that I wish you to dwell on is upon the fact that here you have a white police chief admitting that the worst parts of black history would not have been possible without the police. Is that right? In all of the enforcement of slave laws, it was the police. Slave catchers, you run away from the plantation owner is going to notify the local sheriff. That's the police power. They're going to notify the vigilantes, police power. You notice that the Second Amendment talks about a well-regulated militia being necessary, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, I believe is the language that is used in that Second Amendment. And who do you think they're using their guns on? That's why today when the policeman see a black person with a gun, he's going to get shot. If you see a black person with a gun in his waistband, it's not in his hand, it's in his waistband, he's going to get shot. We got a case right here in Los Angeles that just happened over the weekend. A young man named, first name is Alexander, I can't think of the last name, was shot and killed, Alexander Weber, I believe, shot and killed by the sheriff, LA County Sheriff. And the story goes that the sheriff saw a gun in his waistband, but it doesn't say they ever saw a gun in his hand. But they do say that they shot him. And the next kicker is now you got to find the gun. No gun was ever recovered. The sheriff dubiously claimed that in the ensuing melee, the crowd rushing out from upstairs and coming out downstairs, that somebody probably picked up the gun. Now, if you know anything about police practice, SOP, when there's a shooting, the officer stands over the crime scene. He protects and defends the crime scene. Believe you me, when the sheriff shoots somebody, they call every sheriff in America to come at the double. But yet they're going to claim that these two sheriffs were so inept that they allowed someone in the crowd to come into the crime scene and pick up a gun, walk out with it, and no sheriffs saw it. You know that's baloney. That doesn't pass the smell test. That dog won't hunt. But we still find that the exercise of the police power brutally and cruelly against black people is still being applied. If you're white, you get to sit down on the curb, call your folks on the telephone. If you're black, you're face down with your hands manacled behind your back, and you might still get shot, as in the case of Eric Garner up in Oakland, and in countless other cases across the length and breadth of this great and grand nation. All of those things are what? Intertwined. Why? Because a lot of people still look upon you as though you were what? A slave. And they feel like you've been suffering so long that you ought to be able to put up with a little suffering. And that's not the point. The point is equality and equity. And we must constantly strive toward equality and strive toward equity, because the wealth gap is widening, and there's no justification for it. You must remember that it was in this country that race became the all-encompassing and all-abiding reason for the laws, for the policies, for the practices, for the codes, for the statutes, for the ordinances that have influenced and affected our lives down to this very present moment right now. You're living where you are because of the effect of the policies of years, 100 or 200 years ago, starting even from the end of the Civil War on up through the end of Jim Crow. And just because they stopped a lot of the practices does not mean that the effect and the extent and the duration of those practices is not still going on. If a man sticks a knife 6 inches into you and pulls it out 3, that's not progress. And so these things, my brothers and my sisters, we are left to contend with. That other statement about the knife was a quote from Malcolm X that he made during a speech there in Harlem many years ago. We have, therefore, a great task before us. It is a daunting task. But in this task, as Dr. King said, we have cosmic companionship. We must begin to move our minds toward getting this government to cash that check, make that check good that Dr. King spoke about in that 1963 I Have a Dream speech. Remember, he said it way back before he got down there, said, in a sense, we've come to this hallowed spot to cash a check. Because when the devotees of liberty signed the Emancipation Proclamation, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. And he went on to state that as far as the Negro was concerned, America has given the Negro a bad check. Hey, we got to go back and get that check paid, because that check keeps coming back, insufficient funds. Stock market is going up to 26,000. When it comes to the Negro, the check comes back, insufficient funds. Yeah, jobs are closing all across the nation. The check comes back marked insufficient funds, but yet you see the wealth piling up in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And we are being what? Marginalized and minimized and criminalized. Why is the purpose of the criminalization? To keep you from getting in on the big money. We must demand of this government, of this nation, that it honor the check that it wrote, that all men are created equal, and that means black men as well as any other so-called category of people upon the face of the earth. Final point, I guess, for to wrap this up, is that our very premise of race in this nation is built on a lie. It's built on a myth. Built upon a myth. As all of the learned scholars have informed us there is no such thing as race in the genetic code or in the DNA of any human being, of any geographic group upon the face of this earth. This business that has been codified and that has been enforced and reinforced, and these lies that have constantly been retold. A guy named Jim Wallace calls that America's original sin. Original sin, slavery. And that which follows up upon it, all of this talk about race and racism and inferiority and superiority, all of that follows after that is supporting that original sin of slavery. And so we got all of this race, so-called race talk. You know, we've had learned so-called individuals telling us and writing books. And a lot of us have sit down like little nerds in school and studied these books written by these so-called learned scholars, Charles Darwin and all the eugenicists and all of that crowd that believed, that put those teachings and codified them in practice, so that even in a state so-called liberal as California, we had what you call forced sterilization. You hear me? Forced sterilization. In a land where all men are created equal, we had forced sterilization. People who were considered lewd or loose, or in order to, as they say, to support the strong and to eliminate the weaker people from the face of the earth. And so these type of things must not be overlooked. It must not be forgotten, but neither must they be used as a reason not to fight the power. Because you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, shall make you free, shall set you free. And that's how you break down the walls of segregation. That's how you break down the walls of discrimination. And that's how you break down the walls of pedigree. And you break down the walls of social strata that we have put up among our own selves here in this country. Remember that paper bag test was not put up there by the white folk. That paper bag test was put up by so-called colored folk. Well-meaning. I thank you very much for listening. Remember, God is still on the throne, no matter who is in the White House. God is still in charge. And we can win this battle, and we must push toward reparation. We must not let it rest. We must not let it slide. We must not allow the Negroes who have done well to say we don't need reparation. Yes, we need reparation. What's the problem? We're going to put it right back in the economy. What's wrong with giving us our reparations? Do I have an amen on that? And so until we get a chance to talk again next week, I bid you, my brothers and my sisters, a fond good evening. Keep the faith. God bless you.